For centuries, the peoples inhabiting Scandinavia lived in relative isolation from the rest of Europe. Their villages were scattered among fjords, mountains, forests, and islands, separated by a landscape that made overland travel slow and dangerous. While great kingdoms rose and fell further south, Scandinavian life followed a rhythm dictated by the seasons, fishing, agriculture, and disputes between local chieftains. At first glance, nothing suggested that these remote communities would give rise to one of the most remarkable periods of the Middle Ages. But history rarely changes because of a single event. Major transformations usually stem from a combination of various factors, accumulating slowly until a decisive moment completely alters the course of events. This is precisely what happened in Scandinavia during the 8th century. The population of the regions we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark was steadily growing. Improvements in agricultural techniques allowed for greater food production than in previous generations, reducing periods of famine and increasing life expectancy. More children survived into adulthood, and villages began to grow larger. However, a problem was becoming increasingly evident. The amount of fertile land was extremely limited. Unlike the vast plains of France or Germany, much of Scandinavia consisted of mountains, rocky terrain, and dense forests. Only small strips of soil were suitable for cultivation. Each new generation had to divide inherited holdings among children and relatives, causing land plots to shrink over time. For many young people, there simply wasn't enough room to build a new life. While some stayed on to work for local chieftains, others began seeking opportunities beyond known borders. The desire for new land was not merely a matter of ambition. In many cases, it was a necessity for ensuring their family's survival. At the same time, political changes were shifting the balance of power within Scandinavia. Various tribal chieftains sought to expand their influence over neighboring communities. Armed conflicts became more frequent. Winning a battle meant gaining land, wealth, and prestige. Losing, on the other hand, could mean the loss of everything. These constant wars created an entire generation accustomed to combat. From a very young age, men learned to use spears, axes, shields, and swords. Training did not take place in organized military schools, but was part of everyday life. Hunting, rowing, building boats, and enduring the harshness of winter strengthened these future warriors both physically and mentally. But there was another factor beginning to completely transform Scandinavian society: trade. Merchants traveling across the Baltic Sea brought news of the rest of Europe. They spoke of cities far larger than any Scandinavian village. They told stories of monasteries filled with gold and silver objects, bustling markets, and wealthy kingdoms that possessed far more riches than any Norse chieftain had ever seen. These stories fired the imagination. To a young warrior accustomed to the scarcity of the northern lands, those descriptions seemed almost unbelievable. Places where monks lived with little protection, guarding treasures amassed over decades. It was an opportunity hard to ignore. At the same time, Scandinavian naval technology was advancing rapidly. For generations, boat builders had been refining their construction methods. They discovered how to use overlapping planks to create hulls that were both lighter and stronger. They developed deep keels that provided stability on the open sea, yet also allowed for navigation in shallow rivers. The result was a vessel unlike any other in Europe. These future longships were fast, quiet, and extremely versatile. They could cross rough seas, navigate narrow rivers, and even be carried across short stretches of land to reach other waterways. While larger vessels relied on ports, Scandinavian ships could appear practically anywhere. Without realizing it, the Norse peoples were developing an extraordinary strategic advantage. No European army was prepared to face enemies capable of appearing unexpectedly along the coast, striking swiftly and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. But a barrier still remained. Most Scandinavians had never ventured far beyond the waters near their own villages. Navigating the North Sea posed an enormous challenge. Violent storms could arise without warning. Giant waves destroyed ill-prepared vessels. Banks of fog concealed dangerous reefs. Many sailors vanished without a trace. Even so, some began to venture ever further. First, they explored nearby islands. Then, they reached new trade routes. Little by little, the boundaries of the known world began to expand. These navigators relied on knowledge passed down orally through generations. They observed the position of the sun and stars, ocean currents, the flight of birds, and even the behavior of whales to find their way back. Lacking detailed maps or compasses, they depended entirely on accumulated experience. Each successful voyage boosted their confidence. Each return brought new information. Each new route made the next expedition less risky. Meanwhile, significant events were also transforming the rest of Europe. The Carolingian Empire, led by Charlemagne, was rapidly expanding its borders. Germanic peoples were conquered and converted to Christianity. Monasteries multiplied across various regions of the continent, becoming religious, cultural, and economic centers. These monasteries possessed something extremely valuable: wealth. They received donations from kings, nobles, and the faithful. They amassed jewels, silver coins, ornate manuscripts, and religious objects crafted from precious metals. Unlike military strongholds, many of these places had virtually no soldiers. Their protection relied far more on faith than on walls. For warriors accustomed to seizing resources by force, these were extremely attractive targets. But it would be a mistake to imagine that the sole objective of all Scandinavians was to plunder. In reality, many wished to establish trade relations. Others sought new lands to cultivate. Some sought fame. Others simply desired to become rich. Scandinavian society deeply valued individual prestige. A man who returned from a long voyage bearing silver, exotic weapons, or extraordinary tales greatly enhanced his standing within the community. His name commanded respect. His influence grew. His prospects for forming alliances improved. Thus, travel became more than just an adventure. It became a path to gaining power. At the same time, Norse religion reinforced this spirit of exploration. The ancient gods did not reward passivity. Odin was associated with wisdom gained through sacrifice. Thor embodied courage in the face of danger. Freyr symbolized prosperity. Even a warrior's fate after death was linked to how he faced life's challenges. Dying bravely meant reaching Valhalla. Living without honor was considered a far greater failure than losing a battle. These values profoundly influenced the behavior of young warriors. From a young age, they heard stories of ancestors who had battled monsters, crossed unknown seas, and won eternal fame. They did not seek riches alone. They sought recognition. They wanted their deeds to be remembered for generations. Gradually, all these elements began to converge. Population growth, land scarcity, advances in shipbuilding, maritime experience, internal conflicts, ambition for wealth, desire for prestige, knowledge of new territories. None of these factors, in isolation, would have been enough to launch the Viking Age. But together, they created the perfect conditions for a historic transformation. In the late 8th century, small groups of seafarers began organizing increasingly daring expeditions. Initially, they explored only nearby regions. Later, they began crossing entire seas. Each return brought new information about unknown peoples, unimaginable riches, and even greater opportunities. Without the Scandinavians themselves realizing it, they were on the verge of launching an expansion that would last nearly 300 years. Before long, their ships would appear off the coasts of England, Ireland, and France. Monasteries would be plundered. Entire kingdoms would alter their military strategies. New cities would emerge. Ancient empires would be shaken. The rest of Europe had no idea what was about to happen. But in the cold waters of Scandinavia, the first winds of the Viking Age were already beginning to blow. As northern winds propelled increasingly daring vessels beyond Scandinavia, a quiet revolution was unfolding within the Nordic shipyards themselves. The success of future expeditions would depend not only on the courage of the men who wielded swords and axes, but above all, on the skill of those who spent months transforming massive oak trunks into vessels capable of braving some of the planet's most treacherous seas. Shipbuilding was far more than mere craftsmanship. It was a body of knowledge passed down through generations and refined over centuries. Each tree was selected with meticulous care. Builders sought tall, sturdy, and naturally curved trunks that could follow the hull's shape without compromising its structural integrity. Felling an unsuitable tree meant wasting weeks of labor and an incredibly valuable resource. Once felled, the timber was carefully shaped using axes, adzes, and iron knives. The planks were fitted to overlap one another in a technique now known as clinker construction. This method resulted in a hull that was both lightweight and flexible. Instead of rigidly resisting the waves, the ship would flex gently with the movement of the sea, absorbing the impact without breaking apart. This innovation completely transformed navigation in Northern Europe. Scandinavian ships were incredibly fast by the standards of the time. Their square sails harnessed the power of North Atlantic winds, while dozens of oarsmen ensured forward momentum even when the wind died down completely. In shallow waters where larger vessels would run aground, Nordic ships continued to sail without difficulty. Their draft was so shallow that they could sail hundreds of kilometers up deep rivers, approaching cities and monasteries directly, places that never imagined they might face an attack coming from the water. In other instances, the crew simply had to disembark and drag the ship overland for a few meters to reach another river and continue the journey. No other European people possessed vessels of such versatility, but navigation required far more than just good ships. Scandinavian sailors developed an extraordinary relationship with nature. They closely observed the behavior of seabirds. They knew that certain species never strayed far from the coast, while others signaled the proximity of schools of fish or sudden changes in the weather. Ocean currents, wind direction, the position of the stars, and even the color of the water served as navigational aids during long voyages. In summer, when days were extremely long at high latitudes, it was possible to sail for many hours by the light of the sun. On clear nights, the North Star provided a constant reference point for those who knew the night sky. Historians still debate whether the Vikings used a mysterious tool known as a sunstone. Certain minerals, such as Iceland spar, possess optical properties that help locate the sun's position even on completely overcast days. Although there is no absolute consensus regarding their use, the very possibility demonstrates the deep understanding these navigators had of their surrounding environment. With efficient vessels and experienced navigators, the only remaining question was where to go. The initial voyages were likely not aimed at warfare. Scandinavian merchants had long maintained contact with peoples living along the shores of the Baltic Sea and in Northern Europe. They traded animal furs, amber gathered from Baltic beaches, iron produced in the Scandinavian mountains, honey, wax, high-quality timber, and even enslaved people captured during local conflicts. In exchange, they received silver, fine fabrics, wine, weapons, jewelry, and goods from regions as distant as the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. These contacts vastly broadened the Norse people's worldview. For the first time, many realized that civilizations existed that were far wealthier than any community in Scandinavia. Walled cities, bustling markets, and monasteries filled with precious objects seemed to belong to another universe. At the same time, internal conflicts continued to escalate. Tribal chieftains constantly vied for power. Alliances were formed and broken within a few years. Young warriors had to demonstrate courage to earn respect and attract followers. In a society where honor dictated almost everything, remaining idle meant losing prestige. Maritime expeditions began to offer exactly what many were seeking: wealth, fame, military experience, and almost limitless opportunities. It did not take long for small groups to organize exploratory voyages toward the islands situated between Scandinavia and the British Isles. The goal of these early expeditions was to observe sea routes, identify safe landing spots, and understand the customs of local populations. These navigators returned home carrying not only goods, but also information. They knew which regions had little defense, which rivers allowed for deep penetration into the continent's interior, where food, fresh water, and shelter could be found. Each voyage reduced the risks of the next. Meanwhile, Europe was undergoing a period of profound transformation. Charlemagne was consolidating his vast empire in Western Europe. The spread of Christianity was advancing rapidly. New monasteries were springing up across the continent, serving as religious, cultural, and economic hubs. These institutions played a vital role in preserving knowledge. Monks copied manuscripts, taught reading and writing, and managed large rural estates. Many of these communities amassed wealth gifted by kings and nobles as an expression of religious devotion. However, there was a crucial detail. A large number of these monasteries were situated in coastal regions. Their proximity to the sea facilitated trade and missionary journeys, but it also left them extremely vulnerable to any enemy appearing unexpectedly from the ocean. Few had defensive walls. Almost none maintained a permanent garrison of soldiers. The monks believed that their spiritual mission and their isolation would suffice to protect them. They were about to discover that the world was changing. In Scandinavia, ambitious chieftains were beginning to realize the immense potential of maritime expeditions. A single ship laden with silver could completely transform a family's fortunes. A successful voyage enhanced a leader's prestige within the entire community. Men who returned with riches attracted new followers, strengthened political alliances, and expanded their influence over neighboring villages. Gradually, voyaging ceased to be merely an economic necessity. It evolved into a display of power. At the same time, Norse culture itself encouraged this behavior. Stories passed down orally celebrated explorers, navigators, and warriors capable of facing the unknown. Remaining tethered to the same place for a lifetime was not viewed as a virtue. True acclaim belonged to those who defied fate. Their vessels began to traverse ever greater distances. First, they reached the Shetland Islands, then the Orkneys, next the Hebrides. Each new territory further expanded the Scandinavian navigators' geographical knowledge. Lacking detailed maps, they mentally charted every coastline, island, and ocean current. They shared this information with other sailors, creating a genuine network of nautical knowledge built entirely on experience. By the late 780s, many Norse chieftains were convinced that the sea offered opportunities far greater than the limited farmlands of Scandinavia. It was only a matter of time before one of these expeditions encountered a target whose wealth surpassed all expectations. That moment would arrive on a small island off the northeast coast of England. There stood a monastery renowned throughout Christendom for its religious significance. Its monks had never wielded swords. Its walls were virtually non-existent. Its treasures had been accumulating for decades. In the summer of 793, ships appeared silently on the horizon. The men who stepped onto that beach had no idea they were about to usher in an era that would be remembered for centuries. Nor did the monks know they were about to witness an event destined to change the history of Europe forever. The world would finally witness the dawn of the Viking Age.